Hi to everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. My name is Anita. I'm a youth worker, a trainer, a consultant, and I work a lot with creativity and innovation. I'm not sure I made such a presentation about the practical and creative aspects of feedback. Now I'm looking at it and I'm thinking maybe I should throw it out of the window, but I hope it's useful still. What I bring is some ideas to reflect about these topics, mostly about feedback specifically and how it can be used for reflection. I bring some models just as a reference. I think models have to be adapted to your practice. So they are really just as, again, ideas for you to think what can work better for you in your practice. I mostly bring questions. And some questions I'm going to ask you to share on the chat. What would be your first ideas about that, to answer that question? But most of the questions, I leave it up to you. It's for you to take notes, maybe not to answer right now, but to take it for afterwards for further thinking. Like in any kind of these inputs in Zoom, I bring some old ideas that probably are not new for many of you, and hopefully some new insights that can help you on the process. That's it. Also, I don't bring a lot of academic sources or anything. It's mostly really just tools for reflection. So yeah, I'm the practical type that is more thinking of how you're going to use it than where does this all come from. I would like to start with a question. And the question is, what feelings come along when you think about giving or receiving feedback? So that's a good question for reflection to start with. What feelings come along when you think of giving or receiving feedback?
Anxiety and surprise, excitement, has to be more feelings. Curiosity, excitement and curiosity, thankfulness, excitement, fear, anxiety, gratitude.
Okay. I wanted to start this session about the feelings attached to giving and receiving feedback, because they determine a lot what's going to happen afterwards. And I think that's very important. So when we talk about the feelings that feedback evokes, like you said, we're talking about fear, but at the same time, curiosity, courage, but at the same time, guilt from those who are providing feedback. And this will determine a lot of what will happen next, which is where we want to focus, is the change, right? Is the growth. And if the feelings that happen during the moment of feedback hinder that change or that process of transformation, then it's being counterproductive. So I think one of the most basic things to think about feedback, it's that we really have to care about the environment we create around it to make sure that is an inviting environment for further change, further growth. So this takes me to talk a little bit about why feedback is important. Feedback is important, obviously, for us to continuously learn, to grow as persons. And like I said before, if feedback experiences are not great, then we might feel that we don't want to ask for feedback. It's easier not to ask. It's easier not to know. There I leave a question for reflection, which is, how many times have you actually asked for feedback in your last 10 projects? This is a question for you to reflect on and think about it and think of the reasons why. If you do it regularly, where did you learn to do it regularly? Why do you do it? How is it helping you? What are you doing with that information? And if you don't do it, what are the feelings attached to that? Are you fearful of it? Or do you think you don't have enough time? It's not useful. You don't trust the people around you to give you that feedback, or you don't validate their feedback. So I think there's a lot of reflection there of how do I use feedback or don't use feedback? I think that can tell us, that's an important reflection as well. One of the reasons why feedback is important is because we have all blind spots. That means that there's a lot of things about ourselves, our practice, that we don't know, we don't see. We are aware of some things. We've become aware of some things during our experiences, but a lot of things we don't know. And other people know. They hold information that can be precious for our own growth. So, of course, feedback provides you a space, when given in the right way, provides you the space to understand those aspects of your behavior, of your attitudes, of your performance that can help you grow. Like we said, it's also about learning. It pushes us to think, can I improve? Am I doing things in the right way? It also allows you to adapt ourselves, because sometimes we are doing things quite well, but times change, contexts change, and not always we have enough information to know what to adapt and when to adapt. And adaptability is one of the most important competences. Nowadays, companies list it up really high in their ranks of competences they look in their employees and organizations. So feedback can be a great motor to help you to adapt. I have a little story about that. Years ago, when I was younger, I went on a trip to the Amazon jungle, and I spent a few weeks there, many times with locals, with indigenous people, the places where I was. Back then, I was very much into storytelling, and I was very used to telling stories to kids. So I had this whole portfolio of my stories that I knew really well how to animate, and I practiced them many times. I was really also proud of it, and it was something that I could bring anywhere I went. Is I could tell stories and animate children and make them dream. So I was really proud of my capacity. So during many days, I joined the children in different tribes, and I would tell stories. And the kids would look amazed and surprised and enchanted by my stories. And I was really happy with that, until when most of my stories, they were about the European context, of course. So I would tell a lot of stories about whatever, princesses and princes and castles and kingdoms and everything else. And of course, one day, one child came to me and they said, Anita, we don't know what a castle is, or a princess, or a king, or a kingdom, or anything like that. Great feedback right there. I was telling stories and I was enchanted with my own voice, obviously. And I was really happy that I was telling them so well. And I was telling them very well, but completely out of context. Nobody knew what I was talking about. I probably traumatized a few children. They were looking at me and going, what are these things that she's talking about? So it's not that I was not doing it well, but of course it was misplaced. And I totally forgot to connect with the people that were in front of me and to understand them. So as a last thing, feedback is important for decision making on a personal level, but also at an organizational level, as we will see in a few minutes. It's important to use feedback to make decisions about what we want to invest our time and effort on in the future. So I think we also should look at feedback not just as reflection, conceptual, non-tangible thing, but also as a tool for a concrete process of decision-making and change. Going forward, I would like just to very shortly look at competences, because I know YOCOMO is very focused on this as well. So what do we need to be able to do in order to provide and receive effective feedback? Listening skills, that's the first one, to be able just to sit and be curious about others, to pay attention. We have to pay a lot of attention during feedback, and to feel empathy, to understand the place of the other. And this is not just for the one receiving feedback, it's for both ends. If you are giving feedback, you need to be curious about how is this person feeling about this? What's their state at this moment? What is their reactions to what I'm saying? And if you are on the receiving end, then of course you should be always curious about what is the other person's experience around me? What is the other person's feelings about what I'm doing, my behavior, my attitudes, my performance as well? So listening skills are very important. Feedback techniques are important. So to have some knowledge of ways to be more effective when delivering feedback, and ways to receive feedback without defending ourselves and justifying ourselves and making it almost a fight. It should be like that. We normally say that feedback is a gift, and it should be, what I think is that it's always to understand that it's the other person's experience. So it can only say about what that person felt at that moment or understood in that moment. It, of course, requires also some capacity to reflect and to become aware of where you are. So a lot of critical thinking about, why am I feeling this? Why is this important to me? Documenting, so to be able to take notes in an effective way that you can actually use them afterwards in the change process, and to be able to follow up on feedback, which I think sometimes we don't talk about, which is how do you follow up after you get feedback? And also emotional intelligence, to be sensitive and to understand that feedback when given and received in a safe environment, can really help in connecting people, can really improve the collaboration between people, and it can be a great way to improve relationships around you. Maybe one of the questions I have for you to reflect about is, how could feedback improve your relationships in your work or in whatever context you want to apply this to? How could feedback improve the way you cooperate with others? Now, going forward, I wanted to mention a few feedback techniques, how to do it. First of all, make use of models. I'm going to show a few in this presentation, but there are many models available on the internet. Simple acronyms that remind you of things not to forget, of important dimensions of feedback. And this can really help us to give structure to that moment and to make sure and guarantee that it's going to be a constructive moment. The second thing is notes and co, or your level of being committed to take that feedback and make something out of it. Feed forward in the idea of, I'm not just getting feedback because I should, because somebody tells me, because the other person hinted that they had feedback for me. I'm getting feedback because I'm going to use it for something. I'm going to make a use of this. So try to think of yourself, what could work for you? What kind of notes, in what kind of place that you will see after, how you're going to organize this in a systemic way on your practice. Finally, you can go 360. The idea of 360 feedback is that you don't only ask feedback from one side, from one point of view, but you try to collect several point of views. So 360 feedback means that, for example, if you work in an NGO with young people, you might want to ask feedback to your colleagues, peers, to the management, to the board, of course, to young people, maybe to the cleaning staff, maybe to other stakeholders in the local community that you have to be in touch with, so that you map around you who has a specific point of view about your work, your attitudes, your behaviors that could be valuable for you. And then try to gather that feedback. It sometimes sounds very obvious, but again, then I leave the question, how many times have you actually gathered different points of view for one project that you did? And a second question would be, would that be possible in a near future project? That's a challenge I leave up there for you. Then finally, your organizational culture. One way of making feedback part of your practice is making feedback a practice of everyone around you as well, to integrate it in the culture of the organization. So, for example, if you work regularly with a team of trainers, that's my context, maybe we can agree in the team like, okay, we're going to have feedback session each time we deliver a training together, just half an hour, maybe with a drink, specific questions. And we make that kind of part of the protocol. If you have an organization, you can have guidelines or good practices for team meetings every month, or you can have peer learning going on and you ask feedback regularly to some colleagues. In whatever way it works for you, but it should happen regularly and it should be integrated in the practice of the organization and allow for developing the organization itself. So I think a lot of times professionals or volunteers, they don't make use of feedback because it's not a practice around them neither. So sometimes it's important to implement that. Now, going for some of the modules, like I told you, I don't know the source of these models. I've read them in sites that mention other sites, and then I just gave up. I said, it doesn't matter. It's not mine. I want to leave that clear, but it's just a simple system to help us. So when giving feedback, the EEC model can maybe help you. And it goes for example, effect, and the change. This is a way to give feedback that means that you are specific about the feedback you give. So you give concrete examples, you show the evidence of what you're talking about. So that's the difference between saying, hey, you get angry all the time with everyone, what's going on? Which is not feedback. And to provide an example, for example, to say, I noticed you got upset when this happens. You then speak louder and sometimes aggressively. Now, of course, we can discuss a lot these words that I wrote here, because what's aggressively, maybe it was for me aggressively, but the idea is just that you try as much as you can to give concrete examples of a situation and frame your feedback in one concrete situation that the other person can also remember. And not to say like, you are always angry, you are always aggressive. Then to explain to the person what is the effect of that situation on you or on others if you have that perception as well. So for example, when that happens, I feel powerless and I notice the group feels lost because this person did that and then that person left the room and whatever. And then maybe mention the change. What can be done to prevent these situations? How can I help? Again, we can discuss for a long time these words, but I think the important thing is to focus on the meaning of these steps. A, that you are specific, that you are evidence-based, that you explain what consequences that has for others, and what are possible changes when change is needed. I'm giving an example here of a feedback of something to improve. Sometimes we give positive feedback just saying this is working and there is no change, or maybe the change is keep doing it or do it even more. Very important about these kind of models and applying these kind of models is that you have to understand where the person is at that moment. Sometimes in our field, we say that we should only give feedback if people ask you for feedback. That's one rule. I tend to take that a bit more loose. Sometimes people saw things that I don't know, and how can I ask if I don't know? So I'm happy when people come to me and they say, hey, I saw something and I would have some feedback if you're interested. That gives me the space to decide if I'm interested or not, and to kindly decline or say, sure, I would like to hear about it. So for me, what's important is that both parts understand that this process has to be voluntary, that both have to want this. If one part doesn't want to do this, it will probably not work very well and affect negatively the emotions we were talking in the beginning. Then for me, what is even more important is models that help us to unpack feedback, to decide what to do with feedback. And so this feedback matrix model is about what to do afterwards. After you received feedback, what then? And it shows us here some ideas. So first, if it's expected feedback and positive, then celebrate it. But really celebrate it. I think people sometimes forget that celebration is an active verb. You should do something with it, not just feel proud, but do something with it. Celebrate with your team, offer yourself a present, whatever. Take action to really enjoy the fact that you did something and you got positive feedback. If it was negative, act on it and start thinking, okay, what needs? I expected this. It's not positive. It means that there's something about me that I know needs improvement and it's still not in the right place. What can I do about it? If it's unexpected and positive, then here it states habituated, which basically means, first of all, understand if it's a one-off comment or if more people feel that about you, because there's also that danger. Sometimes one person tells one thing and we take it as the truth. And maybe it was just the experience of one person. It was not how everybody else felt about that. So we have to understand that and validate the feedback we are getting for ourselves. And then try to include more of that in your practice. So if it's unexpected feedback, you didn't know about it, but it's positive, think, how can I do this more? How can I incorporate this more in my practice? If it's negative, then maybe explore it, ask questions about it, be curious, try to understand better what people are meaning with that. Of course, another model that can help you, it's a very known one, that can help you unpack the feedback. So it's really about the SWOT. What does the feedback tells me about my strengths, my weaknesses, opportunities and threats in my own development? And here are some questions that maybe can help on that reflection. You will later can get this a presentation and then take note of these questions. Finally, just a few advices from my own practices. They're worth what they're worth. First of all, preparation is very important for feedback. Feedback can be a tension moment where we feel surprised or we are fearful, or we can feel criticized, or we can feel guilty. So it's important to prepare for this moment. It's not okay if you're just answering an email and then running to somebody to tell you something about your behavior. Take time to breathe, to get in the mood for that, to prepare your questions, to prepare how you want to give feedback or receive it, to understand and to remind yourself that it is a gift that somebody else is sharing with you. Take time afterwards to process the feedback and also to process how feedback happened in a meta level and what can be improved in those moments of feedback, of giving or receiving feedback. One very important thing for me personally is to make it enjoyable. Feedback should be a moment of connection and feeling close to somebody else at some level, to have a tea, to make a joke if you have the context for making a joke. It's not always true. Sit on a park, make it in a way that people wish for more of that. And lastly, be ego-minded. Feedback is a great place for our egos to wake up and to feel all kinds of things. And we need to be very critical about when we feel attacked. Is it because my ego is feeling attacked? When I feel guilty about giving feedback, is it my ego talking as well? And remind ourselves that it's not about you. If you're giving feedback, it's not about you, and you shouldn't be talking about your own experiences and how you do stuff. It's about the other person who is receiving. And if you're receiving feedback, it's also not about you in the sense that it's about your value as a person. It's about you in that specific moment, in a task or in an